Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to everyone who was here yesterday, and welcome to those who didn't make it yesterday but want to be here today. It's very nice to see you all. How was yesterday for you? Was that helpful? Good? Good. That's why you came back. 2 thumbs up. Very good. So yesterday we spoke about what is self-compassion and what is self-compassion not. And we also spoke about the potential of the mind. And the main thing, the main point that I would like you to keep in mind from yesterday is that whatever arises in the mind, all our thoughts, all our feelings, all our beliefs, all our emotional reactions, that's not who we truly are. They come about due to causes and conditions, which are very complex. But in itself, the mind is by nature pure. By nature pure means that it doesn't have any characteristics of its own, which means that the mind, whatever arises in the mind comes about due to causes and conditions. So when we change the causes and conditions, other feelings, thoughts, beliefs can arise in the mind. It's becoming habituated to another way of thinking, reflecting, and with that, another way of reacting, and with that, another way of feeling. And so because the mind doesn't have any characteristics of its own, it has a limitless potential for developing good qualities like wisdom, compassion, loving kindness. Right? This is what we need to remember from yesterday. So today we're going to talk about where does our lack of self-compassion come from? Right? And I will not cover the whole thing, but we make a beginning so that you see in general where the foundation is for our lack of self-compassion. And then tomorrow, I think actually day after tomorrow, we go very specific into that painful feeling that we have inside. I'm not good enough. But I think in order to really take benefits from these teachings, the more you see it in the big context, you will have much more benefit from hearing about it. So before we started teaching today, I think we take a few minutes to settle the mind. Right? So you can think, or you can do it. Taking a few minutes to do a small meditation, helping the mind to come back to the present moment. So for that, you make sure that you sit comfortable. And you focus your mind on your body. Being aware of sensations that arise. Being aware of the contact that you make with your seat, with your clothes. Being aware of your breathing. Our body is always in the present moment. It is never in the past, never in the future. So when we bring our awareness to our body, we bring it automatically to the present moment. And when the mind is in the present moment, all the thoughts that are normally caught up in the past, they come to rest. And all the thoughts that are normally caught up in the future, they also come to rest. And when the thoughts are coming to rest, the mind naturally becomes more clear, more calm, more relaxed. And with a calm, clear mind, we can set a motivation for listening, reflecting today. Although we are talking about self and self-compassion, taking care of oneself, we are doing that so that we can be more of benefit to others. By learning how we take care of ourselves, we will have more to give to others. When we understand better where our happiness comes from, where our suffering comes from, we will have a better understanding for others. So what we're going to talk about today is, where does a lack of self-compassion come from? So in order to understand that deep feeling of inadequacy that we have, the feeling of being flawed, the feeling of not being good enough, which represent that we are not happy with who we are, we first need to have a look into how we find happiness in general. If we are honest with ourselves, we would have to say that we are constantly trying to search for happiness, to do actions that we hope they're going to make us more happy. But we never have found that happiness that is peaceful, that is calm, that gives us the feeling like, oh, now I'm fine. The happiness that we find is most of the time, it is a coming and going. It is very short, for a very short period in the mind. And if we look into the nature of that happiness that we have, it is not really satisfactory by nature. And so then we think, what's wrong with me? I'm trying to find happiness, but I can't, so there must be something wrong with me. And we look around, and especially when we look at the television, there are people that appear so happy. and so successful and so wonderful. And you think, why don't I have that? I also work really hard and I try to do what they are doing, but I don't feel the way that they seem to feel. What's wrong with me? And so we keep trying and we keep trying and we keep trying. And then maybe sometimes we have a glimpse of happiness, and then very quickly that disappears again. So we all do that, each and every one of us, and not just human beings. We can also see that animals do that as well. We all want to be happy and we want to be free of suffering. That is our instinct. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama says it is our right to be happy. It is this instinct that actually, I think, makes us search further and further and further for happiness. And if we look into what is the perfect state of happiness that we can achieve, that is what we call the state of full awakening, or the state of enlightenment, or the state of Buddhahood. It's all the same, 3 different words for the same thing. That is the most perfect happiness that we can experience. So we can say that instincts that is constantly looking for happiness, that is what is going to take us to Buddhahood. That is what is going to take us to full enlightenment. Right? So we should not renounce that. We should not think, Buddhism is not really about happiness. That's more about suffering. No, it is about finding that perfect state of happiness. So never think that you're not allowed to be happy, or that you're not allowed to search for more happiness. Please keep doing that. Very important. So there is nothing wrong with wanting to be happy. But what at the moment, why it doesn't work for us is due to the way that we try to find happiness. And so we're going to look into that today. What is it that we call happiness? You know, when are we happy? That is when we feel good. We are always looking for good feelings. For feelings, we call them pleasurable feelings. Feelings that we agree with. And so when do pleasurable feelings arise? When we come into contact or persons, such as good food or beautiful colors, shapes, nice sounds, pleasant company. And when we come into contact, pleasurable feelings arise in the mind. And then we say, wow, that makes me feel good. That makes me really happy. So then what happens when these pleasurable feelings arise in the mind? Then the mind says, oh, wow, I want more of that. And so then we start craving. And so then we want to re-experience what gave pleasure before. So then we start engaging in certain activities again and again and again, and not because we think, oh, that is going to give me more pleasure, that is going to give me more happiness. That happiness that we experience, we somehow know it is short term. We somehow know that it doesn't last and that it isn't stable. And we know that, you know, often when that happiness arises, we feel like, but there is still something missing. It's not complete. There is a kind of dissatisfaction that comes with that. But it is somehow the only happiness that we have. And I sometimes also have the feeling that we keep expecting that maybe one day we're going to find that happiness that is more stable. And so we keep engaging in the similar actions that have given us so often unstable happiness, but somehow we think maybe one day that is going to be different. Right? Do you recognize that? Because we do not know how to do things differently. So we repeat. If we are truly looking into the mind, what happens when pleasure arises in the mind, and then when we crave for more, is that a peaceful mind, or is that a mind that gets disturbed? Is it a relaxed mind, or is there some agitation in the mind? So we have to acknowledge that. Although that makes me happy, although that gives me pleasure, actually my mind is disturbed when I experience that. So what do we call unhappy? What is unhappiness? What is our suffering? So that is when we don't feel good, right? And that can be, I don't feel comfortable, and it can be, I'm in a lot of pain. All that is, I'm not feeling good, I'm not happy. So when does that arise? When do we not feel happy? When we come into contact with something that we do not like, or some person that we do not like. Or we are unhappy when we do not get what we want. Or we are unhappy when we get separated from something that we have and what we are really fond of. So these occasions make that unpleasant feelings arise in the mind. And when these unpleasant feelings arise, automatically we dislike them and we want to get rid of them. So when the unpleasant feelings arise in the mind, immediately there is an aversion that says, I don't want this. Right? And then when we have this aversion, I don't want it, if we can separate from the object, then we separate from the object and then we feel good again. But if we cannot separate from the object, or if we cannot get what we want, then what do? Aversion arises, then maybe that becomes anger. Then we try with anger to separate from the object or from the person. If that doesn't work, maybe we have to somehow suppress the emotion. And sometimes what we do is, there is something unpleasant, I'm just going to distract my mind into something more pleasant. Right? I feel not happy, I go out and buy some new shoes, because that makes me feel happy. I don't do that, right? But I know there are people who do that, but don't think that I have many pairs of shoes at home. I don't. I have one pair. So what we do not like pleasant feelings. We want to get rid of them. And often we don't even like to feel them, so we push them away or we cover them up. True? So try to recognize what I'm talking about in your own mind, so that it becomes a tool for really practicing and doing things in a different way. I'm not talking theory, I'm talking about the mind, how it works. So our tool for finding happiness is that we follow the pleasant feelings and want more of that. So our tool for finding happiness is actually following our attachment. And our tool for freeing ourselves from suffering is our aversion. Aversion helps to bring separation from the unpleasantness, or aversion brings protection from suffering. We run away from it. So these are the two mechanisms that we have in the mind. One that helps us to come closer to the object, the things that we like, and one helps us to be separated from the object, the things that we do not like. Right? It is that simple. Only two tools, aversion and attachment. And then from these two, all the other emotions arise. like jealousy, like pride, like envy. They're all based on attachment and aversion. So we can say that from Buddhist perspective, in search for happiness, when physical and mental feelings arise, we grasp emotionally at the sense world. So according to Buddhism, this is a very unhealthy mind. We think that if we follow the attachment and get what we want, if we think that if I follow my aversion and get separated from the things that I don't want, I am successful. And we even might have a feeling of being in control. But according to Buddhism, this is a mind that is controlled by attachment and controlled by aversion. And we call that actually a total lack of control. You have no choice. We think we have a choice in following our attachment, and we have a choice in following our aversion. But if we really check, there is not much choice. There's no choice. When attachment strongly arises in the mind, we just have to get it. Right? That's no control. And if something is really causing us suffering, we just do not want to have it. No thinking comes in between. We just don't want it. Right? There is no logic there. It is just based on the feelings. So Buddhism calls that an uncontrolled mind. Right? If you find that difficult to grasp, put it a little time on the shelf, and maybe we come back to that later. And you can maybe later see what we mean when we talk about having control, how that looks differently. So if we are controlled by attachment and aversion, then we can look into, so what is motivating us in this life? And in order to talk about that, I'm going to share the screen with you and show you a little, how would I call that? A kind of a picture. I'll call it a picture. And it is a picture on the 8 worldly concerns. So this is what is really driving us in life. At the left side, you see 4 worldly concerns, and they are all related to the things that we want. The things that when we want them, we are striving from them with our attachment. And at the other side, the blue column is the things that we try to get away from. Right? So we go through the things that we want, and you try to recognize that, oh yeah, that is what I'm doing in my life. So we are craving for what is called acquiring material things, but you can also call that comfort. We are all the time searching for comfort. Right? If you have a certain mattress and there are new mattresses and they're much more comfortable, you want to have a new mattress. If you have, I can say that for whatever, we want to have the best. We want to try to go for the best. More comfort. Right? If we can afford it, we go for more comfort. If you want to look into your daily situation, if you're just sitting, even now, listening, when you feel something that is not comfortable, whether that is a little bit of cold air, or whether that is some kind of itching in your leg, or whether that is anything, any little discomfort that arises, what we do is immediately we do an action to change it. Right? So even if we think, well, I'm not so attached to comfort. If you look into your daily actions, the small things, they're all about getting more comfort. True? So then we crave for the pleasures of the 6 senses, which means we want to feel good. We want to have contact with all the things that make us feel good, whether that is the things that we see or the sounds that we hear. We prefer to listen to pleasant music, not to unpleasant music. We want to have good food. We do not have food that is not tasty. We crave for, even our fantasies. We have certain fantasies. We want to have nice fantasies, not the ones that make us scared or make us feel miserable. So we crave constantly for the pleasures of the six senses. What are you going to eat tonight? I'm sure you're going to think about something that is pleasurable. We also crave for hearing sweet, ego-pleasing sounds or words. We like to have people around us that tell us how wonderful we are and how much they love us and how much they appreciate us, right? We crave for that. If there are days that we hear nothing, nobody is giving us any compliment, nobody is giving us any appreciation, we start to feel like, what's wrong with me? Why is nobody telling me, right? It determines how we feel. And we also crave for personal praise and admiration, and that is how people talk about us. It is about reputation, how we are seen in the world. Right? We do not like it when people behind our back start telling that, they actually look down on us, or they don't like certain features of us, or they can't stand us, or we don't like it. It's hurtful, right? So that is what we crave for. And if we think about our life, then we can see, you can judge yourself, how much time is your mind spending on trying to get these four pleasurable things. A lot of time, no? We are obsessed with that, if we're honest. So what we also try to do is we try to get away from the things that are not pleasurable, the things that cause us suffering. So these are for me, it's the right column, the blue column. So we crave for being free from not having material things or from having discomfort. As soon as discomfort arises, our mind is looking for comfort. Looking for comfort is moving away from the discomfort that is present. We also crave for being free from the displeasures of the six senses. Right? And you can think about that yourself, how you do that. When there is a light that is too sharp, you turn it off. When the food is burnt, no, you don't want to eat that, you want to eat something else. Whatever causes displeasure, immediately we move away from it. If there is a person that you don't like, who makes you feel not appreciated, you try to avoid the person. That's what you do with your aversion. And then we crave for not hearing ugly or displeasing words or sounds. Right? When somebody says something really ugly to us, we feel very upset. And so then we go home and we say, oh, can you believe what this person said to me? He said this and this and this. And then we can keep repeating in our mind in an attempt to get rid of it, get rid of that unpleasant feeling that it caused in your mind. We don't like to be with people who say, displeasing things to us. We don't like it. And we also crave to avoid personal slander, blame, and criticism. right? We don't like to be blamed for anything, whether we have done it or not, right? When we cause some hurt in others and we are blamed for that, we don't like it. We like it even less when we are blamed for something that we haven't done. Same with criticism. Criticism, it's not nice to receive that, especially if it is not accurate, if it has nothing to do with us. True. I can put this little thing on, can we put that somewhere afterwards? Yeah, I think we can put it in a box, right? So you will get that information if you wanna have that. So these are the 8 worldly concerns. And if you see what we are doing in life, we're trying to work really hard to have the 4 in the orange column. And we're working really hard to not get the 4 in the blue column. And we think if I have the 4 in the orange column, I'm going to be fine. You know, I'm really doing well. I'm successful. Everything is going the way I want it. And if we have a lot coming from the blue column, we think, oh, maybe we're failures. We didn't do well. We were not successful. We should have done better. Right? We are striving for one and not getting the other. And so for us, if we have the ones in the orange column, things are good. And if we can avoid the ones in the blue column, wow, then we really do fantastic. So what Buddhism says is all these 8s, all these experiences are all of the same nature. And if you have no problem with the experiences from the blue column, then you're doing really well. So that's a very different approach. Think about that one. If we would be able to live with the discomfort that, of, for instance, not having a lot of material things, that means that if we are fine with that, that means that we have less attachment for comfort. And when there is less attachment in the mind is more calm. The mind is more easygoing. When we can handle, when we get a meal that doesn't taste like anything, but we appreciate the fact that somebody cooked that for us, and we still, you know, we have no reaction to the displeasure that arises in the mind. That means that we have less craving for pleasure. If we can handle displeasing words, then when we do not receive sweet ego-pleasing sounds, it doesn't matter. We are fine with that. When we can handle criticism, when we can handle blame, when the mind is not moved by being slandered, right? And there is less craving for personal praise and admiration. Can you see that when you habituate with the unpleasant feelings that come from the worldly concerns that we find unpleasant, if we habituate with that then we can become really strong in our mind? That then the mind can become really peaceful, undisturbed, no matter what. So that doesn't mean that therefore Buddhism is going to look for that, right? We're not going to look for displeasure. We're not going to look for not having things. We're not going to look for that. But when the feelings arise, and they arise in each and every life, when they arise, we're going to do something different with these feelings than we have been doing so far. Okay. So in Buddhism, the left column and the right column, they're of the same nature. And we say they are both suffering by nature. For us, one is pleasure, one is displeasure. Buddhism says they're both suffering. They are both, I should say, in the nature of suffering. We recognize the blue column as being in the nature of suffering because that comes with a lot of unpleasant feelings. And so we call that the suffering of suffering. And in Buddhism, we say the orange color, that comes with pleasurable feelings, but that is still in the nature of suffering. And it is called the suffering of change. So if our pleasure is called the suffering of change, why? Why is it suffering? How are our pleasures actually suffering? So Buddhism says that what we experience as pleasure is that moment that one suffering is finishing and another suffering is about to begin. And I'll give you an example. For instance, if you sit for a long time, you start at a certain point, you start to suffer. You feel uncomfortable, maybe you feel some pain, and you feel like, I need to get up, I need to walk a little bit. So you get up. And the moment you get up, the suffering of sitting is finished, and the suffering of walking is about to begin. That moment we experience as pleasure. And then we walk and we walk and we walk, and at a certain point we feel like, oh, I need to sit. I want to sit. So the moment we sit down, we feel like, oh, the pleasure of sitting. But what actually happens is that the suffering of walking is finished and the suffering of sitting is about to begin. Right? These are our pleasures. And so this is why we have to keep moving and we have to keep changing and we have to do different things in order to feel that pleasure that comes once the suffering of one thing is, when one experience finishes and we go to the next experience. There we experience pleasure. Same with, when it is nice and sunny outside and you go outside and you think, oh, it's so nice being in the sun. And then at a certain point you think like, oh, it's getting hot. I want to go inside. I want to go in the shade. The moment you go in the shade, you feel this huge relief, like, oh, this is so nice, the pleasure. Because the suffering of being in the sun is finished and the suffering of being in the shade is about to begin. And then we know that when we stay in the shade, at a certain point, it starts to feel chilly. Oh, I go back to the sun again, I need to warm up a little bit. Oh, so nice being in the sun. So we say that these pleasures, they are not real pleasure. If something is real pleasure, no, I shouldn't say pleasure. We say happiness. These pleasures that we have is not real happiness. Because if it was real happiness that would come from, for instance, sitting in the sun, then the more we sit in the sun, the more happiness we would experience. And that's not true. If the happiness that comes from food would be real happiness, then the more food we eat, the more happy we would become. That means real, you know? Real means that I add more, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. If I eat chocolate and the happiness of the chocolate would be real, then the more chocolate I eat, the more happy I would become. But whatever we engage in, there is a point that we feel now it is enough. If I take more, I'm going to be sick. I'm going to be suffering. That shows that the nature of our experience, even when it is a pleasurable experience, that nature, it is in the nature of suffering. Because when we keep doing it, suffering will automatically come. True? Don't get scared. Don't think that we shouldn't have any pleasure. Right? We should have a lot of pleasure. But you need to have a good understanding about what pleasure is and how we use it. And how we do not have wrong expectations of pleasures. Okay, I'm gonna take the screen away. Okay. So if our pleasures would be real happiness, then we would also have to say that each and every person who experiences that or who comes in contact with that object that gives me happiness or gives me pleasure, each and every person should experience the same. Right? But that's also not true. How we experience things depends upon many causes and conditions, and karma is one of them. If you do not have the karma to experience chocolate as pleasurable, then no matter how much chocolate you eat, you're never going to experience any pleasure. And some people have the karma to experience a lot of pleasure from chocolate. So they can eat a lot of chocolate and have pleasure over and over again. Right? That means that the happiness and the pleasure is not coming from the chocolate. And it is also not real in the sense that if there was some kind of reality in that pleasure, then it would be there for everyone. Then it would be there it would be there in a way that if I take more and more and more, I would have more pleasure. So besides these two types of suffering, one that we call the suffering that we all see as suffering, the experiences that we react to with aversion, and then the suffering of change, which is all the pleasurable experiences that we react to with attachment. There is a more subtle form of suffering that is underlying both of them. You know, if you have these two columns, there is a suffering that is holding, or that is like the cause of these two sufferings that come, that were represented in these columns. And that is called the suffering of conditioned existence. If we talk about conditioned existence, we have to look a little bit into where is our body coming from. You know, and in Buddhism we say the body, the mind, is coming from karma and delusions. These are the creators of our body and our mind. So when we get born, we are already produced by karma and delusions. And so if our body is coming from, and our mind is coming from karma and delusions, that means that we are under the influence of karma and delusions. Right? And when we are influenced, if we look into our body, we can see that in every moment of mind, feelings arise. And in dependence upon these feelings, we react with attachment and aversion. And in dependence on that, we engage in physical and verbal actions. And so engaging in physical and verbal actions under the influence of attachment and aversion means that the body, the mind is producing karma and delusions again and again and again. And when we engage in actions, these actions, they lay imprints in our mind. And then at a later point in time, they will result in experiencing a similar feeling. So whatever we feel comes from previous actions. So we are created by karma and delusions. We produce karma and delusions. And we are controlled by karma and delusions. And so we are like little rats, you know, going in a rat wheel, running around, doing, looking for happiness, repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And what we actually want is we want to get out of that get out of that wheel and have a calm and peaceful mind. You know, we want to stop that doing, looking for happiness, wanting to get rid of suffering and being occupied with that the whole day. We want to get out of that. Give me a break. So going around and around and around, we call that samsara. We call that conditioned existence. There we have no choice. You know, at the moment, with our wisdom mind, is not strong enough to recognize how we are under the control of these delusions. So because we are under the control of the delusions, because every time when there is pleasure, attachment comes, every time when there is suffering, aversion comes, we do not have control over that. And so this attachment and aversion makes that we engage in actions. And we might sometimes feel like, I'm not going to go there. You know, there is a kind of control, but you do not have the control over how you feel. And often also not how we react to the feelings. So that is controlled existence. So that controlled existence, where we react with attachment and aversion to our experiences, that mechanism doesn't have the capacity to bring you real happiness. And then I mean with real happiness, a calm and peaceful mind. When we talk in Buddhism about real happiness, we talk about a freedom of the delusions, a freedom of attachment and aversion. When we find freedom from attachment and aversion, that is like jumping out of the wheel, out of the rat wheel. Right? Then the mind becomes free. Then the mind becomes controlled. Because we're not under the control anymore of attachment and aversion. All right, that's what we're trying. So how are we going to do that? We won't be able to do that today, by the way. But we can think about it. And we can see that there is a possibility to achieve such a state of mind. Right? Even thinking about it is so precious and is so powerful. If you start to doubt that attachment and aversion, you know, that mechanism that keeps going, if you start doubting that, and if you start saying, is that the real truth? Maybe there is something else. That already can give a huge change in the mind. Right? So both attachment and aversion, they arise in dependence upon me, right? I want to be happy. I want to be free of suffering. And in Buddhism, we say that because we do not understand the nature of reality, we grasp at that me, at the self, in a way that the self does not exist. Somehow that self appears to us in a certain way, but it doesn't exist like that. Because we believe that it exists in the way it appears, we react with aversion and attachment, and in dependence on that, we engage in actions. So let's have a look at how the self appears to exist, and then we look into how the self does exist, and then we can see the difference between both. Right? And that gives you already some tools of how you can look at yourself and at things in a different way. So how does the self appear? How do I appear? How do you appear to yourself? You know, we appear as one person, right? The self is one thing. So we are existing out of trillions of cells. And then we stand in front of the mirror, and what we see is one thing, the self, me. We do not see the trillions of cells. True? So there are trillions of cells here, and viruses and bacteria, and they all make up this body. And I see my body in the mirror, and I see one thing. True? Think about that. You know, how come? What happened? Trillions of cells, and I see one thing. Where does that happen? It's like a distortion. We see something very different than what is actually here. How come? And so what we see, that self, what we see, looks quite permanent. We know we're changing, but at the same time, we always see the same self, right? Oh yeah, that's me. I recognize me. It's the same. Same person as yesterday, same person as last week. And even if I see the changes, I still think it's the same me. Right? So that self, that body that you see is actually changing moment to moment to moment. Right? If we're going to look into the cells, we know that there is activity all the time in the body. Cells get, they die, they get renewed, they get deleted, they get, you know, we take food in, we are changing all the time. But what we see is, I'm the same. Right? So there is a distortion there. And then we have this idea that when we look at ourselves, that as if we are almost independent of anything else, as if we do not depend on anything. You know, we appear to be very self-sufficient. We appear to be in control. We appear to be almost like objectively there is a person who is me. And that person that I see in the mirror has nothing to do with my mind. True? So independence upon something that has many, many, many parts, something that is impermanent, changing moment to moment to moment, and something that depends upon many things, many causes and conditions, depending on my mind. Independence on that, what we see is something that is unitary, we see only one single thing, something which is permanent and something which is independent. So the object itself is impermanent, totally dependent, and exists out of many, many, many parts. And what the mind sees is totally opposite to that. It sees a single thing that is permanent and that is independent. So what is out there and what the mind does with that, they are two different things. That in itself, there is not so much a problem, you know, if you understand that and if you can relate to that, that is just how the mind works. But then what we believe is that that thing, what appears to my mind, that is real, that is totally matching what I'm actually observing. And according to Buddhism, they are what we call mutually exclusive. They have nothing to do with each other. The way we perceive ourselves is actually totally opposite as how we exist in actuality. And independence on that image that we have, who we are, independence upon that belief in the self, we need to take care of that self, right, with our attachment, and we need to protect ourselves with our aversion. And if that belief in the self is totally opposite to reality, then you would have to say, then the attachment that tries to make me happy can never be successful. And we know that from experience. We have never found that real happiness. And also that aversion and that anger that arises when we experience something unpleasant can also never really bring us freedom from suffering. And we know that as well, right? When there is anger in the mind because we don't want something, do we feel free from suffering, or do we actually feel we experience a lot of suffering? More suffering comes, right? So that is because we believe in something in the opposite way as that it exists in actuality. And on the basis of that belief, we react. How can that ever bring you something that is in accordance with reality? It's not possible, is it? So that is our biggest problem, that self, that belief in the self, and we call that self-grasping. And so in order to realize that that self doesn't exist as an inherent entity, which is independent, which is permanent, which is unitary, that self cannot exist like that. You know, if we would realize that, we realize the emptiness of such a self. Maybe you have heard about that. I need to realize emptiness. What we need to realize is that we believe in something that in actuality doesn't exist. Does that mean that the self doesn't exist? No. I have a self. I can talk about the self, right? But the way I believe it exists, that is not true. That self-grasping mind is like a blindfold that we are wearing. That self-grasping mind makes that we cannot see reality as it is. We cannot see the ultimate nature of reality, which is that nothing exists as a unitary, permanent, independent entity. And we can also not see the conventional reality of things, which is that everything exists independent of causes and conditions. and that things exist in dependence upon their parts. Right? I can talk about me because there are many, many parts, many cells, many organs, limbs, they all together. Because I have all that, I can call that me. So in dependence upon all these parts, I can call it me, which is the whole. So me arises in dependence upon my parts. And then me also arises in dependence upon the mind that gives a name, the mind that makes an image. Right? I have an image of me. I have a name that I give to me. And in dependence on that, I exist. But with our blindfold that we have at the moment, our ignorance, our not knowing, our distorted knowing, we cannot see that nature, we cannot see that reality. And so therefore we make mistakes. When we look for happiness, we make mistakes. Because the mistake is that blindfold that we are wearing. The mistake is our ignorance, our distorted knowing. That causes the mistakes to arise. So in order to counteract that, we need our intellectual mind, because we cannot see it. At the moment, not yet. So we need our reasoning mind to think about, does it really exist like that? Is it possible what my mind perceives that is really true? And then we need reasons in order to say, that cannot be true. Or yes, it must be like this. So it will take a while before we realize that emptiness. It will take a while before we realize the nature of reality. And in the meantime, we are caught up in this conditioned existence, right? We cannot just jump out. It will be like, some people talk about like peeling the onion, or some people say like you have to unwind samsara. Right? We have to create many causes in order to undo the workings of our mind that we have been so habituated with. While we do that, so that unwinding, once we have realized emptiness, we find the freedom of attachment and the freedom of the aversion. We find total freedom of all the delusions. Then we find that peaceful mind. In order to get there, what we want to do is we want to lessen the delusions, right? And at the same time, we want to make sure that we have a good life, that we have a lot of pleasurable experiences, because the unwinding is not that easy. It is hard work. So you want to make sure that you have enough pleasure so that you can keep doing the work. Right? So as long as we are in samsara, our happiness depends upon the pleasure. And so we need to know how we create that pleasure. What are the causes for that pleasure? So tomorrow we're going to talk about that. So if happiness, that the pleasure is not coming from following the feelings, then where is it coming from? How do we do that? Okay. And if the aversion is not what is separating us from suffering, how do we get separated from suffering? How do we avoid suffering? Once we know that, we can look deeper inside to these painful feelings that we have of I'm not good enough, but we need to clean up a little bit, make a little bit of space for that in the mind. All right. So now I'm not sure if I can see questions.
No, Venerable, it seems, I'm very sorry, but it seems that I'm going to have to reset the questions.
Ask questions.
Can you hear me, Venerable?
Try to do live stream on YouTube. And it can be that took away our question possibility, the chat.
It seems I'll have to reset
the
session for us to go to get that.
Don't. If you have any questions, there is a hand raise. Can you give him the mic? Ajir is raising his hand. Maybe you can unmute him and let him ask a question. Yeah. So we'll do one question. If you have other questions, can they send somewhere the questions? Pema? Where? They mail. So you could send a mail to Tushita registration. Register at tushita.info. If you have questions, you can send them there, and then tomorrow I will try to integrate that in what we are talking about. Okay. So someone had a hand raise.
Yeah, Venerable, do you hear me? Do you hear me? Hello?
1 second, Ajirji, she cannot hear you.
Philippe is trying to.
She's talking about it, but it seems your sound is not working.
Oh, now it is. It is now. Sorry. I can hear you now. No questions. I changed that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did that already.
Yeah.
Have I been muted the whole time?
No. We could hear. But then you should be able to hear him. He's muted right now.
Ajia, can you ask your question?
I can hear him upstairs.
Can you tell me the question?
Sure.
Okay. So Philippe is going to run upstairs and then shout the question to me. So the meditation that we're going to do after this question is a meditation on the light body. To give you in perspective, yesterday we talked about the clear light, the clear nature of the mind, that the mind is like space. So today we're going to fill that space with light.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, good, brilliant. So now I'll unmute Ajir again so that he can ask your next question.
Okay. Ajir?
Yeah, do you hear me, Venerable?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the teaching. I have two questions, more in the nature of the clarification. One is that you use two expressions, the feeling and the emotions.
Yes.
For some time it was feeling, and then you said that's the emotion. So
Yes.
I just want to get the difference between these two. How do you differentiate that? That is one. And the second is that
stop.
detailed. Okay.
Can I answer that first?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, because my memory is very short, If I let you ask the second question, I already forgot the first. So the difference between feeling and emotion, because we use them interchangeable, isn't it? But feeling is pleasurable or displeasurable, the feeling that arises in the mind. Emotion is how we react to that. So when pleasure arises and my mind reacts with, I want more, I follow that with my attachment. Attachment is a disturbing emotion. So the feeling is the displeasure, and the emotion is the aversion or the anger, is my reaction to the feeling.
Okay.
Okay.
So what I get that the feeling terrible and emotional feeling. So the reaction that you are saying is emotion. Did you get it correctly?
So the reaction is an emotion. And I'm not saying that every emotion is a reaction. but every negative emotion is a reaction. When
Okay.
we react, it disturbs the mind, it is a negative emotion. When we want to develop positive emotions like love and compassion for all sentient beings, we need to apply reasoning in order to bring our mind past that emotional reaction, right? We have the qualities inside us, the potential inside us to develop a lot of love and compassion. But at the moment we are bound by the emotions. So that means that our love and compassion is partial. When we start to apply reasoning, we can have not just love and compassion for the people that we like, but we can extend that to people that we do not know or people that we do not like. Right? So to do that, we need reasoning. These are called positive emotions. Positive emotions are based on reasoning, and they're not based on emotional reactions.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. My second question is that you have beautifully presented how the mind works in terms of the attachment, and you put a lot of emphasis on it. Now, the attachment and the aversion, they themselves arise from the ignorance.
Yes.
So, who did not we go directly to really deal with the ignorance?
So if everything is coming from that ignorance, why don't we go straight there?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Well, if you have the capacity to do so, perfect, and do it, you know. But I think our problem is that we believe so strong in what the mind is telling us. We can believe so strong in when emotions arise, right? If somebody hurts you deeply, your anger looks really true. And the fact that he hurts you also looks really true. And you feel that you need to do something in order to address that. And that also feels really true, right? Then if I come to you and say, why don't you just realize emptiness and then all your problems are gone? I don't think it's going to work.
Okay.
Okay.
I get
so
the
then
point.
we need
Yeah, I get it.
in order to lessen that, to make the mind more calm. In order to realize emptiness, in order to realize the nature of reality, the mind, the object is very subtle. The mind needs to be very subtle. And in order to make a more subtle mind, we need to lessen the delusions, the coarse delusions, right? And I will talk more about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Is that
Thank
okay?
you. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You.
So if you have more questions, please send them to Tushita. I just gave you the email address.
Register at tushita.info, just a reminder.
Okay, so, and then I will try to answer as much as I can tomorrow or in the following days. Okay. And then we can do a meditation now on the body of light. So if nothing that arises in the mind is inherently existent, if nothing in the mind is really the mind itself, then we can let arise whatever we want, no? We can think that the mind, the body is full of light. That is a possibility. So sit for the meditation comfortable. And it is good in the meditation to have a straight back. Straight and at the same time relaxed. Breathe naturally. And be aware of your body. You can let your mind glance over the different parts of your body in a natural rhythm, however your mind wants to go. But you stay with the body in general. And while your mind glances through your body, you become aware of all the parts. Your legs, your stomach, your back, your shoulders, your arms, your head. But you can also think about your internal organs. Feel your lungs, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, your bladder. Or you can focus on the sensations that arise from the body. And maybe you can feel that by just bringing the mind to the body, by bringing the mind to the present moment, the mind becomes calm and clear. And then visualize in the space above your head a sphere of white light, somewhat smaller than the size of your head. It is pure, transparent, non-material white light. Concentrate on the presence of that light. And if it doesn't appear clearly, that's okay, but try to feel it. Try to feel that it is really there. Think that the sphere of light represents all universal goodness, love, and wisdom. It represents the fulfillment of your own highest potential. And then visualize that it decreases in size until it is about 1 inch in diameter. And it descends through the top of your head, from the top of your head to your heart center. Feel when it has arrived in the center of your heart. And then from there, it starts to expand, slowly spreading to fill your entire body. And when that light starts to spread in your body, all the solid parts of your body dissolve and become light. Your organs, your bones, your blood vessels, your muscles, the tissues, the skin, all become pure, translucent white light. Concentrate on the experience of your body as a body of light. Think that all the problems, the negativities, and hindrances have completely vanished, and that you have reached a state of wholeness and perfection. Feel serene and joyful. Rest in that feeling. Any thought or distraction that appears in your mind, let that also dissolve into white light. And notice that dissolving into light doesn't mean that you dissolve into nothingness. Feel comforted in that space of white light. Feel safe and feel loved in every cell of your body. And then visualize that the light starts to contract back. Let it go back to your heart. And your body becomes solid again. Feel your body, your skin, the muscles, the arms, the legs, the head. Feel all the parts of the body until you feel you are completely present in it. And that light in your heart, you can keep that there. And maybe sometimes you can reconnect with that. It represents your potential for wisdom and compassion, your potential for universal love. And if you feel that you want to keep meditating, please do so. But as we have come to the conclusion of this session, I will dedicate whatever merits that we have gathered by listening, by reflecting, by meditating, by connecting, all that positive energy. We can dedicate that for the benefit and happiness of all sentient beings, wherever they are in the universe. And I'm going to thank you for having been here today. And I hope that you're going to be back tomorrow, same time. Thank you very much.